Well, it is an honor because I'm just so proud to introduce Srividya Ramasubramanian to you all, because Srivi was one of my first PhD students, and I know you are thinking, how could that be? Well, I was only 15. No, I'm just so proud to introduce you to Srividya and her work, because she is really, really a superstar in our field. And we knew it early on that she was going to be a superstar. She got her PhD from Penn State, and while she was a student at Penn State, we have a big, one of the first honors of many. She won the Penn State top award for graduate students research at the whole university. Yeah. So she's gone on to do great things. She's now an assistant professor, but really a rubber stamp away from an associate professor at Texas A&M. Right after she finished her PhD, she did a postdoc at the Annenberg School at Penn. And now at Texas A&M, she's the director of their Communication Research Lab. She's the research chair of the Mass Communication Division at NCA. And she continues to garner a great deal of enthusiasm and respect for her research that focuses on issues of stereotyping, social justice, and now she's developing a very exciting program of research in media and positive psychology. Her work has won all sorts of top paper awards. She's a much beloved professor by her students. Her work appears in the top journals in the field: Communication Monographs, Journal of Broadcasting Electronic Media, Journalism, Mass Comm Quarterly, and I could go on and on. But I'm just so very, very proud to be the one to be able to introduce you to her. So with that said, if you could join me in welcoming Srivi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm a very low-tech person for a media scholar. I don't know if this is working. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the very, very kind introduction. And it's I mean, there is a saying in Tamil, which is my mother tongue, which goes "Kaake kitan kunji pon kunji." I'm sure many people in this room understand. She's laughing. It means that for a crow, for a raven, even their little one is very, very special, even though we look at a crow's chick and think, oh, it's ugly. But for the crow, mother crow, even her chick is very beautiful. So it's like saying for Mary Beth, she's like my mother. No. No, you're like the peacock and I'm like the crow chick. But this is a very beautiful time of the year to be here, and the campus is just lovely, and the flowers and all of that is just amazing, and the beauty of the place is also reflected in the people here. And I think I've met some of the smartest and sweetest people in our field, and it's just been an honor to get inspired through those conversations. So thank you so much, Sri, for this opportunity to be here and share my work. And I'm also this kind of, I'm at this stage in my research process, career, that I feel that it's a good time for me to kind of reflect back on what a series of studies that I've done and kind of see what's the bigger picture and share that with you. So I will be talking to you a little bit about studies that I've done over the past 2-3 years, and also a study that I'm working on currently. So I'll kind of present it as a research program, so to speak. A little bit about myself. I see myself as a media psychologist, and I'm looking at media as a tool to inspire, to elevate, to transform, to connect. And I see it as a powerful tool to be able to do those kinds of things. And within that frame of using media for these kinds of purposes, I feel that we have to appreciate the interconnectedness of humanity and see the oneness across all of humanity, and be able to see the common thread that connects everybody, and still appreciate the diversity of this planet and of the peoples on this planet. So, and it's possible to appreciate both of them, to see the oneness as well as see the diversity of everyone. So I want to bring those two ideas together. One, that media is a powerful tool to inspire, elevate, and so on, and also that we are here to share the core of who we are, which is love, if I can use that word, and inspire one another through just being ourselves, true to ourselves. So in that context, I see, say, prejudice reduction as one way, or one thing that would be something that I'm interested in, but that there are other things also this has implications for. So I've done work relating to stereotype change and prejudice reduction because I see that there are the focus need not be on doing content analysis of media to say how things are bad, right? But that I wanted to look at this and say, what can we do about this? How can we use the media to actually change things and actually connect people and see the connections across? And that has been my general approach to the study of media effects. So I use media itself as a way, as a strategy to bring about this change. So I have studied it in the context of counter-stereotypical media exemplars within media context and how they might play a role in changing our negative attitudes. And also I've looked at media literacy and media literacy strategies as ways of empowering audiences and viewers to kind of find ways to reflect on messages and see, how might they take charge of what meanings they want to create out of this context. So that's just a broad overview of the kinds of things that interest me in this field. So in this context, I wanted to just talk about social identity as a layered, nested, multiple aspects of oneself, because we have to begin with the self, and when you talk about the self and others, so we have multiple identities that we become salient at different points of our life, and we're conscious about it often given our minority status in some of these situations. We're more aware of those identities, for instance, and so I'm interested in also seeing this as nested, and in that sense, the broader our belongingness, right? As we widen our circle of belongingness, there are more and more people within that group. So you could just see yourself as, like I see myself as a Tamil ethnic person, or I can broaden that and see, oh, I'm an Indian, or I can broaden that and see I'm an Asian, or I'll be talking to somebody from Mars and say I'm an earthling, I'm a creature from the earth. So how do we, the more we broaden the circle of who is us, the more the sense of belongingness, and then when somebody belongs to you, then you will relate to them in a different way, through empathy and through compassion and through admiration and pride and respect. and love. So, so when we have this idea of in-group and out-groups, we can still appreciate these different in-groups and out-groups without dehumanizing the other. And media can play a very important role in this, because often media dehumanizes the other, the out-groups, through words, through images, and these are often very subtly coded and need not necessarily be very obvious, but it's something that happens constantly and it happens consistently, and this is something that we want to pay attention to, because dehumanization is very relevant, because when that happens, there is a disconnect. The sense of belongingness is broken and the other is separated. There is a division and separateness that comes in, and whenever there's some separation, then it's easier to look down upon that group or even be hurtful towards that group. For instance, if in the military and army and all of that, they actually ask you to immerse yourself in, say, video games that present the other as enemy, targets, and so on and so forth. And that is a process of dehumanization, because you cannot kill somebody whom you think belongs to you, right? So you want to kind of numb that aspect of yourself in order to reach that. So, so just to give you this broad context of the power of media to do that. But I'm examining this in the context of race relations, and also I did a series of experiments in which I'm looking at counter-stereotypes in the media and what role do they play in the way we think about the group in general. Okay? Do they help us to move forward in terms of what we think about the group as a whole, or do they get subsumed into existing stereotypes that we have of the other? And this was something that I was interested in studying, and I was also interested in looking at how they might play a role in telling us why there are differences between groups, so causal attributions, and also in terms of policy implications for, say, affirmative action or welfare, things like that. So, so that is the specific study that I'm interested in sharing with you. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Are
Yeah.
counter-stereotypes still stereotypes that are counter, or are they non-stereotypical portrayals that counter the?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Theoretically, there hasn't been very much clarity in terms of what counter-stereotypes are, and that's something that I'm trying to also do with my work. So the way I have defined it is the latter. So in terms of images or words or representations which challenge.
So they're non-stereotypical portrayals.
Yeah.
They're not just stereotypes, they're counter
Yeah.
to primary stereotypes.
Yeah. So I make a distinction between negative and positive stereotypes and counter-stereotypes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you for that very good question. So just in terms of media exemplars, the theoretical thinking behind this is stereotypes function as schemas, and the traditional way of thinking is in terms of cognitive representations, but some recent research has talked about it being exemplar-based processing. So you could have exemplars, specific instances, specific people or persons of that group that could play an important role in influencing your attitudes towards the entire group. So the representativeness heuristic means that these exemplars tend to be overused in terms of the kinds of attitudes that the kinds of judgments that you make about reality and so on and so forth. And the recency, frequency, vividness of exemplars that you're exposed to, and media is a great source of many exemplars, influence your social judgments, and that's what the theory is talking about. So I'm looking at African American portrayals and white American attitudes towards African Americans. We see that there are also there is a variety of representations of African Americans, mostly as stereotypical ways of violent and criminality, but there are some, in the entertainment context, we do see some representations in authority positions, which also kind of fits the Clarke's four-stage model, if you're familiar with that. But interestingly, media also not just tells us that these are the traits associated with this group, but also tells us subtly why these groups are in these places, in subordinate places. So, for instance, if we're talking about laziness, it just doesn't say that African Americans are to be thought of as lazy, but it also says that they are in this place because of not external social factors, but because of personal deficiencies, or individual deficiencies, lack of motivation, or things like that, and not external things like discrimination or lack of access to resources. So I make a distinction between internal and external causes for being in the subordinate position, for the inequalities, and I bring that into the theoretical model in this study. And I use the priming mechanism, and I think many of you would be familiar with that, so I'll skip that. The first study, actually, I call that the Obama effect study, and here I was very excited when Obama was elected the first black president of the United States, and it was seen as a moment, a historic moment, and in lots of ways Obama kind of challenged the existing stereotypes of an African American in terms of being very well-educated and suave and a kind of gentle person, which was kind of counter-stereotypic to the existing stereotypes of African Americans. So I was very interested in seeing how reading about him might influence perceptions about African Americans in general, and whether it's actually going to make it better, or would it lead to more of like modern racism? So how does media framing of political figures affect the racial attitudes and beliefs, and specifically Barack Obama's representation, stories about him? And I hypothesized, had two competing hypotheses, one using the generalized appraisal perspective, saying that, you know, when you're exposing the readers to counter-stereotypes like Obama, then that will lead to reduction in prejudice, reduction in negative feelings, and also lesser modern racism and more support for affirmative action. But there was also some literature which suggested that this might not be the case. So if you're familiar with the enlightened racism perspective, there they suggested that counter-stereotypes like Obama might actually hurt the cause that in terms of equal rights for African Americans, in the sense that counter-stereotypes might lead to the feeling that racism is no longer an issue, that discrimination does not exist, and that will lead to lesser support for affirmative action and more of modern racist kind of feeling. So I wanted to see which one of these is holding true, because they were, you know, both of them kind of made sense theoretically, but I wasn't sure. But so I had a story about Obama which was positive, and another one which here it doesn't show very well, but they were identical. As media scholars, we are very particular that our stimuli are exactly the same, size, font, and everything, right? So there was one positive and a negative story about him. So it was about framing the same person in different ways, but unfortunately, and we also had a control group, but there was no difference across the conditions. I did not find any difference depending on positive or negative framing of the story. Yeah.
My eyesight is very poor. Could you go back to the stimulus and explain how one is positive and negative?
The one on the right was a story about a positive story about him and how he's doing very well and helping with. It's an
Brazil. So it's
He's Brazilian leader is talking about Obama in a very great way. He's glorifying, praising Obama for his achievements.
Okay.
And in this one, it talks about how he has to use. On the left, he's talking about how his popularity is waning, and he needs to do desperate things to gain back that popularity. So maybe this was not the best stimuli, and that could have been one reason why it didn't work. But also something I realized was the participants were from Texas A&M. This was an experiment in Texas A&M, and it's a very politically it's very conservative, and it's a very strong hold for Republican stronghold. So Aggies are very it could have been that regardless of the stimulus, they were not going to change. So I did not find any. So I was kind of disappointed. Yes.
I just had a quick question about
yes.
the measures that you used.
Mm-hmm.
Were they deliberative, or were they more non-deliberative or
non-deliberative in terms of attitude? They self-reported attitudes towards African Americans, feelings towards African Americans, attributing internal or external causes for differences in quality of life between white Americans and black Americans, and also attitudes towards affirmative action. So these were the measures, but it was not moving. There was nothing happening there. So then I said to myself, maybe the political figure is not working very well. So we will have to disconnect politics from this, and said, let me use counter-stereotypes who are from media, like media celebrities who are not related to politics. So then I did another study where the counter-stereotypes were different. So I'll show you that example. So I call it the celebrity recognition priming study. Here again, I was interested in seeing whether the stereotypical versus counter-stereotypical exemplars influence all of these attitudes and beliefs and feelings. So I did a 2x2 factorial design with in the first step, it was a celebrity recognition task. So I said, do you recognize the celebrity? How much do you like them? And what do you think of them? And so on and so forth. And then later on, I said, we now complete a quality of life survey, because I also felt in the first study, the measures, people were they knew what I was looking for, I think. And that doesn't help in priming, right? So here I wanted to kind of make the two tasks very different. So I worked towards that. I also did a manipulation check for whether they saw these as positive and negatives the way I thought of them. So I had Omarosa and Flavaflav for the stereotypical or condition dislikable African Americans. Then we had, so you can see how Paris Hilton and Jerry Springer for the dislikable in-group members and so on. So they looked at these people and said, how much do you recognize them, and do you like them, and so on. And it was very clear that there was a huge difference between the liked and disliked, and also so that was helpful to see that was the case. And the measures that I used, you'd asked about the measures, so we had some criminality and laziness stereotypes, causal attributions that I talked to you about, internal versus external attributions for differences in quality of life. So it could be personal deficiencies like lack of motivation or lack of intelligence, or it could be societal or systemic things like lack of access or discriminatory practices, institutional discrimination, and so on. And I included modern racism, ambivalent racism measures here, and feelings. So how did you feel about this group? Did you have feelings of discomfort, nervousness, disgust, fear, dislike, anger towards these groups. And I had 3-4 different groups that they answered about, but I was mostly interested only in the African Americans. And affirmative action support. So I had questions which say affirmative action is a good way to deal with past racial discrimination and or whether it's unfair on white participants. So I did find differences here, and what I found was here the exemplars actually are dummy coded such that 1 is for stereotypical and 0 is for counter-stereotypical. So the stereotypical exemplars led to more beliefs about laziness, but also about criminality. Okay, and that led to more internal or personal attributions for failures of African Americans or differences in quality of life, and greater prejudicial feelings towards African Americans, and lesser support for affirmative action. Okay, so lesser support for affirmative action. So in essence, I think one of the contributions of the study is also to show that internal attributions are very interesting to look at, causal attributions, because they tell us much more than just beliefs. They tell us why, what is the mechanism that leads to the feelings, the negative feelings. So that was very interesting, and the model held very well with the data. So that was very heartening to, heartening is the wrong word in the kinds of studies that we do, but so then I was interested in seeing, does the format make a difference? Because in this, I just showed pictures of celebrities, right? There was no news story or anything around it. So I wanted to check for 2 things. One was if it's a celebrity news kind of format, does it still have an effect? Because the first study was a news format with Obama, right? So I didn't know whether the news format is a problem, or whether the choice of celebrity was a problem in Obama's study. So to tease that out, I'm just redone the study, but use the celebrities in a news context. So there'll be a news story about that celebrity. And what I've done is also this time around, I asked my participants, I did a series of pre-tests, and I had them generate the likable and dislikable media characters more in greater depth than I had done before, because I felt that the choice of my celebrities may not have matched very well with whom they thought of as most likable or most dislikable. So we got an interesting yes?
I'm sorry. Could you tell us a little bit about how you defined news stories?
Uh-huh.
What you consider to be news stories for this?
For the third one?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if I have examples, but I don't think I have the examples here. But so for the stories about, so the ones which we wanted to be counter-stereotypic, right? So we had stories about Beyonce and Oprah. Then for the dislikable ones, it was Tyra Banks and Monique. So these were generated by our participants in terms of which of these people they like or don't like. So they gave us names, a list of names, and then we ran a second study in which they rated all of them, and then we picked the ones which were significantly different from one another. And the news stories were all formatted to be kind of same length and appearance in terms of the images. But the stories were usually taken from an existing story about this person, but they were edited to make the formatting same. But we kind of made sure that the stories about the positive, likable characters, but also presenting them as a likable person to kind of strengthen the manipulation that way.
But a news story, so it wasn't about something that had happened to them, or was it a feature? Or
It's mostly, it's a feature. It's mostly like a feature about them.
So it might be an entertainment news source
Yes,
as opposed to
yes.
New York Times.
Yeah, it's all from entertainment news source. The formatting was like celebrity news. E, and it was taken from those types of sources. So the news value in it is not tremendous, but it's just highlighting the characteristic of this artist or media character in a way that we wanted to emphasize. Yeah.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a hopelessly naive question, probably? How exactly is exemplar defined? Is exemplar is every celebrity an exemplar? Is exemplar something that different people perceive differently? Is it a person, or is it a set of stories around that person, or a set of attributes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's an excellent question. I think I should think more deeply about that, because I have looked at exemplars basically as celebrity or media persona who represent that group. So I'm thinking of exemplars of African Americans in the media, and that's how I have conceptualized this. But maybe some people process it in a way where the exemplars are the stories, or there are some things like that. But that's how I have seen them. But that's a very good question.
So is anyone an exemplar?
Someone is an exemplar if for me personally, if you ask me from my perspective, an exemplar is when from the viewer's perspective they are salient to them and they represent something meaningful in that category. From the view, so if the viewer recognizes that this person belongs to this group, let's say, because some of them may not even register that they are part of this group. So then they are not an exemplar for that group.
If you don't know that Ellen is a lesbian,
Yes, then you don't see them as an exemplar for that. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So there has to be some trait or something that connects them to this group, that they see them as representing that group. That's why I think it's important to actually go to your group and ask them for, which is what we did here. Yes.
So does that mean a counter-exemplar is a person that people overtly recognize as going against that group?
Yeah, so we asked for those who reinforce stereotypes and those who challenge stereotypes. That's how we phrased.
Okay, and then the participants who were in those pilots actually
they generate names.
Like this person represents it, this person challenges
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah. So then they wrote down a lot of names. That was the first step. The next step, what we did was to list all of these people and actually do a likability kind of thing. Here in this case, there is a confound with likability and counter-stereotype. And so future study needs to kind of disconnect that as well. That's something to be done. Yeah.
Just a question. If you can go back to the model that you showed us.
Yeah.
You said that the exemplars were dummy coded as one for the exemplar. So can you tell
One
us
for the stereotype.
for the stereotype?
Stereotypical exemplar.
How would the model look like if you had that as stereotype?
It would be the other way around, because I didn't, so basically the counter, so that's a very good question, because you're asking me a very good question, because here I'm not able to say if the counter exemplar is reducing prejudice or whether the stereotype. So what we've done in this new study is the other thing that we've added is a control group, a control condition where they see about that bubbles of energy story, which I don't know, it's kind of doesn't have any people. So I said we shouldn't have any people in the story. So it was about some black hole or something like that. So we added a control condition because we want to see if the control and stereotype conditions are similar and the counter stereotype condition is actually reducing, or is it that there's a difference between control and then stereotype makes it worse and the counter stereotype makes it better? So what's going on? So that's something that we've still not come to analyzing that aspect of it. But when I just looked at the initial analysis, it seems to suggest that two things I've observed about the data just before coming is that yes, we find that the counter stereotypes are reducing, okay, and also there the in-group also is making a difference in this study. In the previous study, I didn't find, regardless of whether they saw dislike Jerry Springer or what is the character from Jennifer Aniston, regardless of that, it didn't matter who the in-group people were. But in this study, they generated their own preferred in-group characters, right? And so we actually found this in-group effect too, that when we group dislikable out-group, or dislikable in-group like the black sheep with likable out-group, that combination was the strongest. So that's what we had hypothesized, and that's what we got in this study. We had hypothesized in the previous study, but we didn't find that effect. It was not significant enough. But here we find that significant. But I have to compare it with, in looking at the control group, I need to go back and do more detailed analysis. But it looks like the counter stereotypes is actually reducing. So that's where I am at, and in terms of future directions, I want to add implicit measures into the study. I have used lexical decision tasks in the past, and I want to incorporate IAT, and I've used word completion tasks. I want to see at the subconscious level, do we find these effects? I'm also working on some research with Mary Beth Oliver and on the role of inspiring and elevating messages in prejudice reduction and more greater connectedness, and that's very exciting for me, and I want to incorporate more of positive media psychology into my work more broadly in terms of human values that are implicit in a lot of the research that we do, but people haven't theorized it and talked about it in a more explicit fashion. So whether it's about wisdom or courage or compassion, things like that, to see, and also to look at connectedness effects and say media and spirituality in that sense of belongingness and oneness. If we can use the word spirituality, it's a loaded term, but that's the direction in which I'm headed. So thank you for the opportunity to share what I've enjoyed myself, and it always brings greater joy when you share things that you like. So thanks for the opportunity to do that, and I invite you to ask me any questions or give me suggestions for how, what I can do more with this. Yes?
I'm just curious because you started out talking about you as a person connecting your research to social good. Mm-hmm. You have some candidates like that. How would you intend to use this, so to speak, in a socially good fashion? I presume you'd want to increase or decrease stereotypes.
Right.
Look, but you also have a free press at work here. So, I mean, how would you use it? What do you anticipate?
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways in which we can approach this. One is to make not to look at the content creators as the other either, but to kind of bring them into our fold, right? And I think for them also to come up with high quality programming is an important goal for many of them. So so when we make them sensitive to the kinds of effects that some of these the choice of characters and the way the scripting of narratives have So that's one thing that we can do. I think as media scholars, we are in a position to have that kind of to create spaces for those kinds of conversations with those who create content.
So you're talking about entertainment programming versus news?
Yes, I come from an entertainment kind of angle to this, so I realize this is more a journalism school. I need to kind of keep that in mind. But even with news, I think this whole angle of internal and external attributions are very important, because the way you frame a story suggests the causes implicitly through subtle cues. So I think you could frame a story, you could go into a slum and say, you know, oh, look at the suffering here. Or you can go into the slum and say, look at the resilience of these people. Right? So you can do the same story in different frames. So so I think that there is a way of representing a group in using some counter-stereotypic examples also included in the conversations, so that it's not just the same things again and again, but to show multiple angles, to show a diversity of exemplars. And also with viewers, when you sensitize viewers to these things, they can seek out more positive representation. They can seek out stories that inspire them, or they can seek out a variety of representations of groups. So I think that's another angle to it. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. Very much enjoyed it. And I just have a question, and I'll ask you, and I'll just ask the group too, because it's something that is bugging me, that about work that I'm doing, that you're doing, that we're doing. So I love the idea of elevating people and the idea of that. But in the back of my head, I've got this worry, you know, that part of social change is instigated by feeling uncomfortable. And that if we inspire people, white privileged people, we show them the blind side, and we show them the white savior film, and they feel all warm and fuzzy, self-congratulatory. That, you know, it's not, I'm worried about that it's not changing. It's making us too comfortable. It's making us too, you know, self-satisfied that everything is okay. Anyway, that's just a worry.
Can you ask that question, make that statement differently? What is it?
Oh, I don't know.
What's your point?
My point is that is elevation always gonna do the thing that you think? And I can think of good reasons why it might not. I like to think it will, but I'm thinking of reasons why it might not too.
Yeah, I think the key is to see if it leads to compassion or it leads to complacency.
And Mary Beth, you think of yourself as the one with the control? I don't mean as in a control group, but you're thinking of yourself as the one who's trying to elevate or trying to make change, as opposed to just measuring what media messages do?
Well, yeah, I mean, as an experimentalist, sure. I mean, you know, if somebody comes in the lab and we're going to show them something, try to elevate them, you know.
But you, as an experimentalist, you're trying to see what elevating messages do. Like, you're actually trying as an academic to elevate? I mean, you do, just your presence does, but I didn't realize you were actually trying. I'm not kidding. So you think of yourself as an activist?
Well, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, in the sense that, you know, like I want to have research make a difference in the, you know, in the political social realm. I mean, ultimately, I mean, whether or not it does is that's a great question. But I mean, what I'm not trying to elevate by my presence. That's for sure. I mean, I'm trying to show a media stimuli that'll elicit elevation. You know, and
Yeah, I think that's a very deep question. I mean, it's a very important and very profound question because it's not clear. I think we need to do more research. It's not clear. I mean, if that's what elevating messages lead to, if it goes to a space of, oh, I'm contented with how things are and nothing needs to be changed, everything is fine, then that's a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess what's motivated is that there's like so many white savior films.
Yes. Yes.
Even ones that I really love, like To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite movies. You know, I love that movie. But there's so many white savior films, and they elevate like viewers and maybe all viewers. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, in terms of white savior movies, like I feel that the emotion that's evoked is one of pity.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Because when you show suffering and you're showing the white character coming in as the savior to save the masses from misery, that's a feeling of pity. And you don't feel pity towards those whom you think belong to you. You feel pity towards an outgroup that you think is inferior.
Oh my God, you know, right.
So there's a difference between compassion and pity, I think, which is very important. It might seem subtle, but it's very crucial because when you think of, if I'm thinking of compassion as connectedness,
Yeah.
so you feel connected to this group and therefore you want to do something to help. But if it's pity, you want to do something, but it's not because you feel connected, but rather because you look down upon that group and you want to help out because you are being so generous towards this.
Yeah, and To Kill a Mockingbird, you know, that whole phrase, why wouldn't you kill a mockingbird? And it was because basically mockingbirds are there to give us pleasure. That's really what Activism said, you know? Thank you.
I had another question, more analytically and sort of the ways that research design plays into this. And I'm just wondering, I guess it was unclear to me in your last study exactly what sort of identification of in-group and out-group you're looking at and how you test for that. So it sort of seemed to me that you were assuming I would see a picture of a black celebrity and that would be an out-group. And you were assuming that I would see a white celebrity and that would be an in-group.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas going back to your earlier slide, you talked about nested identities and
Right.
also multiple identities.
Right.
So I guess I'm just wondering sort of how you build in that test and sort of what you're actually identifying with or seeing as an exemplar, I guess, in that case, but also to broaden this out a little bit and to think about, you know, maybe people could be like exemplars, for example, like, I don't know, I guess showing my age, Roseanne Barr, for example, was an exemplar of certain blue collar, right? And she was a class exemplar in some ways that perhaps you could identify with. And frankly, you know, as a person, given that I'm an academic, and you know, I identify with Obama probably far more than I would with many other white people in this country on the basis of certain education, class, et cetera, and other markers. So I'm just wondering sort of whether you can sort of adopt this to sort of think about those other nested identities in complex ways.
That's a very good point. In this study, so what we tried to do was to kind of, we thought that gender and age would be two other identity things that would be, that people could connect with. So what we tried to do is, of the ones that were listed, we tried to pick one male, one female, one young, one old, for each race group. So in that way, we try to keep them constant, that you would relate to, you will be presented somebody from who's male young, female young, or male old, female old, or African Americans, all of this, and also the same for, so that's one way in which we kind of try to bring in that the multiple identities into this one. But you're right, I mean, there could be other ways in which they relate to the character that so we try to build that in to the extent possible with gender and also with age. which we thought were two important things. But we could add some other layers to it, like class or other things that we could possibly do. But I think that's one way in which I thought we could enrich the experiment to include all of those levels. Yes.
Right back at the beginning when you first did the Obama effect, I remember when Obama was elected that I read that SAT scores of black students who had taken the SAT before or after Obama was elected afterward increased dramatically. Not the same students, but just overall. So there must be some
Yes,
Obama.
yes.
Yes,
Yes, we can. Yes, I think there have been some studies in psychology which do document this kind of effect, which is why I thought I would find that, but maybe the way I operationalized it not there. But I still think the Obama effect exists, even though it wasn't captured in my particular study. I do think that's because there's this global self-esteem that also gets I think is affected by that. So for that, I think we need to do studies with African Americans.
Yeah, so most of the subjects are white?
These are all white.
Oh.
Yeah, so that will be very important and relevant to see how the in-group, perceptions, and that's very important to study. Yeah. Yes.
Just kind of following up on Jane's point, we have some students in our department in psychology studying the race in Obama. And
Oh, okay.
and, one of our students has some really neat data from the national election studies showing that I think it's sort of the Aggie explanation. It's super polarized with party identification.
Oh, okay.
Like that,
I would like to see that so that I can explain why.
I can ask, it's just a master's thesis right now. She's probably submitting it for publication soon, but it's really interesting. It's just showing kind of more racialization of things among, if you're already conservative.
Oh, okay. So my hunch is true
so
then.
Sort of, depending on who you're asking.
Yeah, so that was on my hunch because I had just one or two questions which asked about political orientation. And all of them suggested strongly that, and so I attributed to that that was my guess.
Right,
so, but this is helpful to have an actual study where you see that coming through. Yeah, that would be great.
I want to ask my colleague Rhonda, I never thought of that into your question. Should journalists or journalism scholars have an agenda?
No.
Should not. But in
Other than to reveal what effects are and how best to put together news so that you inform the public. That's your agenda. That's an appropriate agenda. That's a limited view.
Well, when you're down teaching the journalism students, you're always thinking that if they apply those skills, they will improve society with good coverage and so forth. But it is true that society has to improve it, not them.
Right. So our job is to provide the information. It's a position of distance and separation. My esteemed colleague might disagree.
Distance and separation could be why people don't watch professional journalism anymore.
My esteemed colleague. Point. I mean, if you start mixing it up, who's minding the store? Who's separate and distant? We're just like everyone else. But she's not a journalist.
I'm not.
And I don't mean any disrespect by saying that. You're allowed to want to raise
It's sometimes extremely hard to evaluate journalism and its effects, and I wonder if long ago we shouldn't have established some kind of if we shouldn't have compared journalism to public health, so that you go and you look at the social indicators of the community. There's poor education, poor just the social dynamics of that. It's a failure of journalism.
Well, and there's
But we have no way
a
of
nice
doing it.
historical stream up, the Hutchins Commission and all of it. I mean, there are certainly those who say that you can mix some activism in here, you know, even at differing levels, that muckraking is nice and noble, and so it's not distant. It's
No, it's
but
definitely involving. Yeah.
right, and I'm just not really comfortable with that. It makes me itch.
But in a way, this is muckraking scholarship in a sense that.
Right, but it's not journalistic.
No, it's not journalistic, but you could
She's happy to
easily,
use news
you
stories.
could easily see where she could go into a news writing class and talk about in-groups and out-groups and phrasing and context. You want to avoid contextualizing within a good group and a bad group news story.
Well, with the idea of showing a diversity of views, of not always following, especially if a journalist is covering something in outgroup that you might feel a little uncomfortable and what you know is what you've seen in the media. I mean, I grew up in a setting that the first person of color I knew as a friend was when I was in college.
Yeah.
I'd seen African Americans before, but didn't know anybody until I went to college. And so what I knew of, not African Americans was not the term that was necessarily used in my household, what I knew of people of color was very stereotypical. And so having a conversation where you make sure you're aware that other types of other viewpoints on it exist is a good thing to have, especially with young journalists, I think. It's not a bad thing to have.
May I ask you your opinion on something? And
Yes.
if you don't want to answer, it's okay, but you talked about the president and his, the way people saw him, and then entertainers and the way people saw them. Do entertainers have as great a role in influencing our stereotypes or reinforcing them as someone with the stature of a president?
Yeah, see, actually that is one key point that I want to bring out from the study, because we think that entertainers have no role, but this study clearly shows that they do have a role in our political beliefs, so to speak. You know, even something like affirmative action is being influenced by media celebrities' exposure. So actually, this is linking entertainment theory to political effects, right?
And
so
we don't realize that those are characters; they're not real people.
yeah, but they're still having an influence on perceptions, beliefs, and also policy opinions.
But and the celebrities she used, a lot of them are reality TV. I mean,
Yeah.
Flav is
Yeah, they're
real.
reality.
Well, yeah, he's real, but he's a brand.
And Omarosa apparently is a real human being, not a character.
Well, I mean, they're real human beings, but they're playing a role. They're not. I don't. I hope Flavor Flav doesn't wear a clock to bed at night.
Jerry Springer, I mean, he was mayor of Cincinnati. I remember growing up with him. He was actually a positive role model. He was politically progressive. He just wrote the wrong check.
Yes.
I wanted to go back to Mary Beth Oliver's question about elevation and what that does, you know, to people who think they're elevating and whatnot. I mean, I just keep going back to the idea of, you know, posed by, you know, Bruner and other social psychologists about categorization.
Yes.
You can't conceptualize those, you know, two things that are different without seeing them as the same at some other level. And so, like, this notion of elevation, I think, is maybe not necessary, because I think like the most transporting media experiences are the ones that, you know, if you take that definition, you know, shines the light on the commonalities rather than, than the difference. And so if you focus on the commonalities, it's not really a question of elevation of one over the other.
Yeah.
It's rather just a shared, you know, perspective, finding, you know, a unifying theme.
Yes. I mean, I think there are multiple ways of getting at this, you know. And one way is to emphasize and highlight the similarities. Yeah. But we also want to make sure that in that process, the differences are still celebrated in some ways, you know, because there are some particularities of lived realities which are, you know, which don't connect at that common level. But there are a lot of shared experiences that are common across humanity too. So there has to be some balance of that, I think. But the elevating messages could also be another way of getting to that end. So there are many ways, I think, of reaching that state that we want to, where we want people to appreciate the connectedness. And but yeah, it may not be necessarily. It could just be if we compare stories that emphasize difference versus stories that emphasize similarity, and that would be an interesting study in and of itself, to see how does it affect overall views towards that group. You know, I think that will be a very valuable study, because you could write a story in those different ways. You could cover the same incident by highlighting the differences between groups or highlighting similarities.
Yeah, looking at maybe emotions to see whether things like pity versus compassion.
Yes.
Or, you know, or just like a shared perspective or something.
Yes.
So that's definitely what I was thinking. It's like just induce the emotion. Just go into the appraisal literature, figure out exactly what is supposed to induce what kind of emotion.
Right.
Write the story in that way.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So there could be one study I'm envisioning is you induce these different emotions of pity versus compassion, let's say, or elevation and pity. Another route could be just in terms of highlighting differences versus similarities, where we're not talking about emotions, but really it's talking about how you're framing.
Where you draw the groups.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a third approach could be elevating or not elevating, right? So there are multiple ways, I think, of getting to where we want to. This is something that I never thought of at the beginning of the presentation, but thanks to you all. Now we have 3 studies. We have 3 studies waiting to be done.